Okay. Well, good evening. Welcome to the Fall Warrant Review Meeting. I am Martha Hanner, Local Action Chair for the Amherst League of Women Voters. The League has organized tonight's meeting in conjunction with the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee in order to acquaint Town Meeting members with the warrant articles that will come before the special Fall Town Meeting when it convenes on November 7th. The League works to encourage informed voting at all levels, including local government, and to that end we publish Your Amherst Government, and we publish the Town Meeting Handbook. These are available at the Jones Library. They are also available on our website, www.lwvamherst.org. And we have a few copies here tonight if there's some new members who haven't received them. We also prepare They Represent You after each local election. That has contact information for all town meeting members and local officials, and there are a few on the back table here tonight, but you should have received one last spring. Yes. Mm-hmm. The spring 2012 local election will be particularly important. In response to the 2010 census, the precinct boundaries changed slightly, and consequently all town meeting members must stand for election. And the League will be preparing information that will be distributed through the local newspaper in time for the 2012 election. Yes. We want to thank Amherst Media for televising this event tonight, and welcome to all of those of you who are watching from home and not having to struggle with parking here. To our live audience, please check that your cell phones are turned off. And now I want to introduce Peggy Roberts, who's the chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, and she will describe the process that we will follow for tonight's presentations. Thank you.
The Town Meeting Coordinating Committee is elected by Town Meeting to try to make Town Meeting work as well as it can as a legislative body for Amherst. We try very hard to inform town meeting members and the public, because really an informed electorate is extremely important for good government. The warrant review that we're having tonight is really just to introduce, to explain what articles are proposing to do. This is not a time for advocating and for debate. Those really happen at town meeting, on the floor of town meeting. That's what it's all about. There are only 18 articles in this special fall town meeting, but even with only 18, we do have to limit the time so we aren't here late into the evening. So we do have a timing set up, the same one that's used in town meeting. And the speakers will see the green light as they're speaking. When there's 30 seconds left to go, the yellow light comes on and the red light says the time for that presentation and questions are over. I'm hoping that all of the presenters will leave a little bit of time for at least a few questions. We won't be able to go into tremendous depth on some of these, though. And now Harrison Gregg, our town moderator, will be moderating this meeting.
This one is a piece of cake. No, there's no cake. I'm sorry about that. Maybe next time. I do want to thank the League and the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee for arranging this meeting, for lining up all the speakers, and I want to thank all the speakers who were willing to come and explain things to us. I have a simple job. I'm just introducing people. I am supposed to say something about Article 1, which traditionally is an article in which the town meeting is asked if it will hear reports that are not available in writing. If town meeting passes this, It only means that it'll hear the reports, not that it will believe them or approve them. And as far as I know, there are 3 reports expected that I've heard about so far, and those are from the Committee on Homelessness, the Public Shade Tree Committee, and the Finance Committee. I'm keeping these reports to 5 minutes unless someone can make a strong case to town meeting for more than 5 minutes. So anybody who's presenting such a report should let me know if they feel they need more than 5 minutes. Hopefully we'll get most of our reports in writing. That's all I have to say about Article 1. And so I'm going to introduce Kay Moran. Are you presenting for the Finance Committee tonight on Article 6, Transfer of Funds to Stabilization?
Article 6 is to transfer a sum of money from available funds to the Stabilization Fund. We did this a couple of years ago. The Stabilization Fund is part of our reserves. It currently balance stands at $1,421,401, and the rest of reserves is called free cash, which is neither free nor cash, but it is funds that the town has that have not been allocated. We like to keep a good level of reserves. It's expected that the town will get a one-time payment from the state of about $500,000. In additional, it's to make up for the state aid that was cut in the current fiscal year. We won't get it again. The Finance Committee, perhaps as we speak, is discussing how much of this to propose putting into the Stabilization Fund. And we will come out with a recommendation for that. The reason to put it into the Stabilization Fund is that while you want to if you want to spend free cash, it's a simple majority vote of town meeting. For the Stabilization Fund, to put money into it or to take money out of it requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting. There will be a fuller explanation in the Finance Committee report to town meeting that will be distributed to town meeting members before the meeting starts and will be on the Finance Committee page and on the town website. Any questions?
Now, we have microphones here, but my understanding is that this microphone only goes to the TV. You're not hearing anything over a speaker, are you? No. So I just want to urge the speakers to project to the people in the room, since the microphone gives you a false sense of confidence. Our next presenter is Claire McGinnis, the Town Treasurer and Collector, who's going to speak on Article 8, Local Option Abandoned Property. Claire?
The Municipal Relief Act of 2010 made many changes for cities and towns. Some of those dealt directly with finances, enabling cities and towns to do things less expensively or with less administrative burden. This is one of those changes enabled by that law, and it refers specifically to abandoned property, in this case, checks that never get cashed. We issue checks to vendors and employees, as you know. Some of those get lost and are never cashed. We have requirements in terms of both timing and notice when we issue checks, how long we have to let the check be out there before we can return those funds to general operating flow, as well as notice that we're required to send to people, to those employees and vendors who haven't cashed those checks. If we accept this article, it changes 2 parameters within those requirements. It would shorten the waiting period that's required from 3 years to 1. And it would also eliminate one of the notice requirements for checks under $100 in value. I can't see my timer.
The timer is not working properly.
Okay.
You have plenty of time.
So just some more background. The notice is required, is that we notify everyone by U.S. mail to last known address that there is an uncashed check. It gives them the opportunity to call us up, say, yes, I really do want that money. Please reissue the check. Here's my new address. We also are required to post on the website the full list of all checks that are uncashed. The notice requirement that's eliminated is to list in the newspaper in a legal ad checks of less than $100 in value. We will still be required to list in the legal ad in the newspaper checks of more than $100 in value. I requested this of town meeting because it does reduce the administrative and labor requirements within the office.
Thank you. Yeah, you can take questions.
Where is it that one can look up to find out whether they have funds? You said it's posted online. Where is that?
It's posted on the website. When we do this, it's posted for 90 days. There's a flyer on the lead-in on the homepage. You can also find this if you Google your name, or if you're a company, Google your company name. And then you would have a hit that said, oh, somebody in the town of Amherst is trying to reach you. Any other questions?
This is an example of one of those state laws that becomes effective in a particular town only when accepted by town meeting. Now, our next article is Article 3, the War Memorial Pool. David is David Zomack, Acting Town Manager, and in this case, Director of Planning, Conservation, and Inspection. Let's kind of speak to it.
Thank you, Harrison. I think the great news is that my stint as acting town manager may be coming to a close. Mr. Musanti is back at work today, part-time, so we're very excited to have him here. Article 3 is being put forth and for consideration before town meeting in an effort to rehabilitate the War Memorial Pool. As many of you know, after the extensive study and very broad community support expressed for the War Memorial Pool and its rehabilitation and reopening last year at town meeting, town staff have undergone and invested a couple of months look at the pool and the surrounding area. And what you have before you is a request for $297,600. This is part of a grant reimbursement program that we have applied for. The town has applied for what is called a park grant, and I'll talk a little bit more about the second park grant that we have applied for. This is a 70-30 reimbursement program through the state, and we are very hopeful. Our grant is already in, and we're hoping to hear before town meeting begins on November 7th whether we have the grant. The grant would cover, the state portion would be $208,320, leaving the town share of $89,280. Of that, you recall that town meeting did authorize about $65,000 at the Springtown meeting to go toward renovations or work at War Memorial Pool, and so about $45,000 of that money is still available and can be applied to our local share, our local match. So the only new money that would be essentially asked for would be $44,280. This would be an extensive renovation of the pool, the decks, the filter system, some work on the 1950s pool house, the fencing, filter work, with the ultimate goal of opening the pool in June, July 2012, and hopefully for many, many years to come. So I think I'll stop there and take any questions if there are any. Yes?
What would be the disposition of this if we didn't get the state grant?
Could you repeat the question at the mic?
Sure. The question is, what would happen if we didn't get the grant? Excellent question. We're feeling very confident. The state comes out and does a thorough review of the grant, the site. So we're feeling very confident. Again, our hope is that we'd have some word on it by the 7th. Mr. Musanti's direction to me has been that he would like town meeting to consider the entire amount if we don't get the grant. This is a very high priority for the town, and there's been broad community support for the reopening of War Memorial Pool. Again, the ask of, if you will, of the free cash would be $44,280 if we get the grant, and obviously the full amount if we didn't. This is a reimbursement grant, so we must expend the money first, and if we get the grant, expend the money first, and then we're reimbursed 70% of those funds. The target date of opening would be June 25th, 2012. Yes, Kevin.
This is awesome. Thank you very much for all your work. I'm really very pleased to see that this is happening. But it seems like it continues to be and has been a fairly hefty budget to bring this pool, to get this pool open and operating in a year. For what seems like a fairly compressed schedule. Essentially, 1 week in June, all of July, and then 3 to 4 weeks in August. I believe it closes in late August. Traditionally closes in late August. So, is there any discussion at all? I know staffing is a problem. A lot of the lifeguards go away to college, come late August. And I don't know what other staffing constraints are on a full basis. But I wonder every year if there's any discussion of the pool being open, say just weekends in earlier June and then through the part of September. It just seems like the weather is still good and there's a fair budget. The budget for the pool is fairly hefty, but it seems just a compressed schedule. So is there any consideration of that?
It's a great question. I think keep in mind that this money and the importance of this money is the investment over a 10 to 15 year period that this would essentially rehabilitate deck, pool liner, filters, filter room, some of the other amenities around the deck. So we're really looking at this as, again, a long-term investment of capital. And the importance of bringing it to Fall Town Meeting is the park grant only happens once per year. So we only get one shot at this. It's a 70% reimbursement. We are able to and have planned to set aside some of the money that town meeting authorized, about $8,000, for expenses that would occur in FY12, in other words, in June, because keep in mind that the LSSC budget does not have any funds allocated for opening War Memorial Pool. So we've already thought of that. The possibility of opening on weekends, either earlier in the season or later, I think I would leave to Mr. Pooler to work out the details on with Ms. Chalfant. I think that's certainly a possibility that they could look at, but keep in mind we're spanning 2 fiscal years here. We're going to try to get, and all of the preparation that goes into filling the pool, getting the water ready, hiring the staff, much of that happens in June, so we're going to use some of the money that was allocated for town meeting for that, and then we're fast approaching the budget season for FY13, and it's an excellent time to be thinking about how we operate the pool in FY13, and that's really, to your question, Kevin, of whether it could be an extended season beyond the typical mid-August closing. And I would leave that. Yes.
Are there any plans to try to get contributions from people in town? Because there was a lot of support at the time of town meeting.
Actually, that very topic came up at the select board meeting on Tuesday night, and we've already had some people come forward who are interested in helping on the private fundraising side, so yes. Moving along quickly, in a similar way, we, town staff, working with various committees, have put forth and submitted another park grant for work at Puffer's Pond. And these are all available online, actually, on the select board packet, and we'll have them available in the second mailing for town meeting members for both these articles. Puffer's Pond, as you may recall, was studied extensively by the Puffer's Pond 2020 group. Members of the Conservation Commission and members of the North Amherst community looked at serious issues of erosion, parking, trail maintenance, and out of that study came a number of recommendations that were made to the Conservation Commission and to the Select Board. And out of that, town staff crafted a grant. And what you have before you here is a warrant article that indicates we are looking for and have asked the state for $370,000 for work up at Puffer's Pond, things like beach restoration, beach stabilization, etc. This is, again, a very high priority project for Amherst. We feel as though Puffer's Pond really has not gotten the kind of TLC that it needs, and I think that's well documented. I want to make it clear that we are hoping very much to get the grant. If we were to get the grant, the town share would be about 111 of the 370,000. If we don't get the grant, and hopefully, as I said before, we'll know before November 7th, if we don't get the grant, this article would be would essentially be referred back to the Conservation Commission because we really don't feel as though that's a number that we can put forth if we don't get the grant. So we would look again next year to resubmit this grant for funding in FY13 and 14. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay, any questions about?
Carol.
Yeah, I'm really glad that a lot of effort's being put into Puffer's Pond, and I hope we get the grant. I was just wondering, in terms of the new layout that's proposed and the idea of eliminating parking on the street and creating a 50-car parking lot, how far away would that 50-car parking lot be? And if the grant, if the project's approved, if the project is approved, is it set in stone that that would be the parking, or is that still fluid?
No, that's another good question. The grant that we put forth is a design-build grant. The first year would be for design, so town staff, Conservation Commission members, members of the public would be able to participate in a design study of that area. And then if we were successful in getting the grant, the first year would be design, second year would be build, construct. I think a lot of time and effort went into looking at where parking, this is not additional parking, this is parking to substitute for the unsafe parking that is currently happening there that is causing erosion into the Cushman Brook and Mill River. So we're not talking about adding 50 more parking spaces, we're talking about moving the existing parking to a safe area that is more sustainable and doesn't degrade the ecology of the area. But yes, the answer is there would be some opportunity. I will say that there isn't a lot of space there or logical dry space places for that parking to go other than what was identified kind of up near the Ruxton gravel pit along State Street. I honestly don't know, but all of those are available. Most of those studies are available on our website under Puffer's Pond 2020, and you can see some of the preliminary designs there.
Are you going to speak also to Article 5?
I'm going to let Mr. Tucker is here, and he's going to address Article number 5.
So Mr. Tucker will speak to Article 5, Amherst Housing Market Study.
Thank you. This is an article that is an outgrowth of several things. It is an outgrowth of the Gateway Corridor Visioning Project. It is an outgrowth or an implementation of the master plan. It is a complement to existing housing market studies that are ongoing under our block grant program that are principally aimed at affordable housing. What this does is fill in the gaps. This was a specific recommendation of the consultant at the end of the Gateway Corridor project. What has happened both in that project and in subsequent village center projects is a strong preference being expressed by the community for new housing to be able to be occupied by someone other than groups of undergraduate students. Specifically adults, grown-ups of one sort or another. And part of the intent of this study is to both look at who has been trying to enter the Amherst housing market and has not been able to because the housing has not been available, and who in the regional market could be attracted to Amherst if the right housing was available here. Both sets of consultants that we have worked with on both the Gateway project and on the Village Center project have identified current demographic trends that are affecting housing nationwide and in the New England region. We have a very large group of the boomers who are in the process of retiring and leaving their suburban homes and looking for housing closer to centers, within walking distance of goods and services, on bus lines and so forth. We have an almost equally large number of what the consultants are calling millennials, who are the boomers' children, who are coming of age, starting their own households, and their housing preferences appear to be different from their parents, their post-war parents, and they are looking also for settings closer to settled areas. They're not looking out in the woods for their housing. And finally, single women, as heads of household or as households unto themselves, are an increasing market force looking for their own housing. So these are some of the target groups that would be analyzed under this study. The amount being asked for is the amount that was recommended by the consultant. It's at the top range of the amount that was recommended by the consultant. We met with both the Town Commercial Relations Committee and the Select Board recently. The Select Board asked that in the process of developing this, that we bring a draft scope back to them for review. We will do that for them and for the public review at the planning board meetings as well, so that people will be able to see what it is that is being studied in more detail. And additionally, there are some rather expert resources in the area, the Donahue Institute and others at the university, who would be able to assist with that. And if they are able to do so, and we can, as a consequence, reduce the amount of the cost of the study, we certainly will. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Fox?
If the purpose, as you explained, of hiring a consultant to identify what kind of housing people might be attracted to in all of Amherst, it strikes me as odd that we're going to have that study after we're asked to adopt this massive new zoning for North Amherst and South Amherst, the form-based zoning. It seems to me that it almost assumes that people who would come to Amherst would prefer that without having asked them whether they do.
We're getting a little bit into advocacy and debate.
No, I'm wondering, what is the explanation for hiring a consultant after the adoption of the form-based zoning?
The information that the consultant is asked to identify, the need for that information arose out of these two planning processes. If you asked planners off the top of their heads, and many people, are these folks trying to come to Amherst? Yes, we have rather strong anecdotal information that they are. Are they here in the region as a potential market? We believe that too. That's our informed speculation. That is not evidence. And I believe citizens want clear evidence and have said so. In fact, when we have proposed, well, this is the kind of housing and this is who we think will go in there, part of the question that we get back is, well, you can't prove to me that we're not going to end up with hordes of undergraduate students. So part of this is intended to answer that question that the community has asked. The Gateway project was being carried forward by the Amherst Redevelopment Authority. It's not a project of the Amherst Redevelopment Authority. It's a project that was being pursued jointly by the Redevelopment Authority, the town of Amherst, and the university, which is also an interested party in that specific project. The Village Center projects are entirely town projects, both in terms of being sponsored by the Planning Board and being participated in by the citizens who live in or are interested in the village centers that have been examined. The Redevelopment Authority has in fact been asked earlier and considered whether or not they wanted to spend any more of their rather limited budget on anything further having to do with these studies, and they declined, having already spent about $30,000 on behalf of the town and others in order to get the Gateway Corridor project started. So I hope that answers the question. This is, if I may, this is coming out of free cash, or is proposed to be, and that was the recommendation of the town manager.
I think we've used up all our time on this particular subject, so we need to move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll next hear from Amy Lane, Assistant Superintendent of the Department of Public Works. Ms. Lane?
Do you guys have my slides? Okay. So I'm going to talk about half the articles on the list. I apologize. The first one is Article number 2, and this is just to allocate some additional funds into our water fund operating budget. We have embarked on a program to install radio readers on our water meters, which just helps in the efficiency of getting reads on water meters. And so this is just to be able to continue that effort. So far we've put in, I believe, over 600, but we have about 5,600 total services throughout the town. So we're just trying to continue that effort and hopefully turn this into about a 5-year project.
Might add that this money is not coming from taxation, but from the water fund.
It's coming from the water fund, and the water fund at this time has plenty of free cash to be able to do that. So, are there any questions on this one? Okay. The next one, if I can get the next slide up. The next one, Article 9. Article 9 and Article 10 are actually pretty similar. Article 9 is that property there labeled the Plaza property. We're looking to allocate funds in order to purchase that property, which is within our Atkins Reservoir watershed. Atkins Reservoir is one of the surface water treatment or surface water bodies in our town. So this is just purchasing another piece of property so that we protect the watershed. This would be funded partially by the water department, but there's also a 50% matching grant by the DEP. So we're looking, I believe the price of this has already been negotiated at $120,000, and so $60,000 of that would be through this matching grant that we're applying for, and $60,000 of that would be through the water fund. So I think the grant is due November 1st. We have a good history of obtaining these grants, so we feel very optimistic about that. Are there any questions on that one?
Yeah. Can you explain, do we own other land around that? Do we own other land around that?
We do. This map doesn't show it. Dave, I don't know if you know how much of the land around it, but we own a healthy portion of the land within that red boundary. That's our watershed boundary, and within that we own a healthy portion of it. And when parcels like this become available, when landowners let us know, we do try and grab them to continue to preserve that area. So.
We go on to the next one?
Yep, so Article 10, it's that Bellevue property. It was on the previous map as well. It's within the watershed for the Holly and the Hills Reservoir, which go to our Centennial Water Treatment Plant. So again, it's a similar proposal. This one is a 14-acre piece of land. I believe the cost has been negotiated at $14,000. This one we're not applying for the DEP grant, so this would be paid for out of the water fund. Any questions? Okay. So the next one. All right, Article 12, it's for obtaining or for temporary easements around the Pelham Road Bridge. So you can see where Fort River crosses Pelham Road, and it's easements in order to do some work on that bridge. So if you go to the next slide, that's not much better either. I don't know if I have a pointer at all. But if you can see where the bridge is in the middle, there's going to be a pedestrian bridge down below it. And so the easement is going to be for being able to put in that pedestrian bridge. There you go. You were just pointing at it. Right there, that's the pedestrian bridge. So the easement is going to be from 2 different properties on that side there in order to put in that pedestrian bridge. And then on the north side, just in order to regrade and stabilize that slope.
Yes.
Do you know how many trees are going to be, if any trees are affected in achieving this easement?
I don't know. That's a wonderful question.
Ms. Ford?
Yes. I believe so, yes. Yep. If Dave were here, he might be able to answer that for you. If he comes back, we can ask him. Are there any other questions on this one? Yeah. Okay.
South Street?
Next one. Article 13. This is in order to do some repairs on the Norwottic Rail Trail, the bridge that goes over Snell Street on the rail trail. They want to do some improvements to that. So in order to do that, we have to reroute the bike path around that bridge while they do the repairs. So this is just to get a temporary easement from Amherst College in order to reroute it. So this right here just shows the bike path. Green is where we're going to reroute the bike path, and that purple property is where we would need to get the temporary right-of-way in order to cross that. And if you go to the next slide, that just shows where the reroute is going to go. It's most likely going to follow that red path, which is the temporary easement at the bottom, then going down Baker Street and connecting into the little bike path extension on University Drive, going up Northampton Street and down Hazel Ave to get back on, to reroute it around that bridge. So, are there any questions?
There is a scrivener's error in the article itself. It says Hampshire College. The intention is clearly Amherst College, and it says Amherst College below. So I'm accepting the correction in the motion of that Hampshire College to Amherst College.
I just have the same question. It's going to be for all the easements. How many trees are going to be affected in the construction?
And I am not sure about that, but I guess that'll have to be questions that'll be asked at town meeting. Yeah, I'll tell Guilford to have an answer for that.
In terms of the whatever you're doing to the bridge, will it have any effect on the height of the bridge over the road and ease of traffic underneath?
I believe the intent is not to widen it or to raise the height. The people that live in that area would prefer to keep traffic at the speed that it's going. Any other questions on this one? Great. All right. Next up, Article 14. Article 14 is to get here we go. Article 14 is for permanent easements, and this is because of the Atkins Corner project. So this first page just lists the property owners that we will need to get the easement from. It's mostly Hampshire College, but there's just a little bit of land from each of the other 3 that are listed. And then if you'll go to the next slide. The intent of this one is because of the Atkins Corner project, the layout of the road is going to be slightly different than it is now. Right now, there's a sidewalk that runs, you can kind of see it there, it runs right next to the road. Well, with the road being slightly wider, we would either have to take down 4 black walnut trees, or we have to take this easement to run this multi-use path behind it. Part of it's because the road's getting a little wider, and then part of it's also because it's going to be a multi-use path, so it's going to be just a hair wider than the current sidewalk. So that's the intent there. And I believe the next slide, if that, I don't know if that's any clearer, but that shows where the trees are now, and that this that this multi-use path will go behind those trees to preserve those. So, are there any questions there?
Will this multi-use path that's going behind the trees, will it be constructed in such a way that it won't cause the trees to die over time?
I believe that's the intent of it, yes. There's a question up here.
Will there be a copy of this in the packet?
Will there be?
Well, I hope there would be.
Okay. Okay. I will. We can arrange that. Okay. I was going to say, I can certainly provide this so that you have a chance to look at it. Yep.
Sorry.
Could you show the previous slide? I couldn't figure out where that was because Mountain View Circle, this, if north is up the top.
Yeah, this is, it's 116 coming down, right in the middle of that circle. That's the sign for Hampshire College, the road that goes into Hampshire College.
Yeah, but how can the Epstein's property be involved?
That's only one of the easements.
So there are a bunch of different easements, different places. Okay, thank you. Because the Epsteins are down the other side of Bay Road.
Okay. Okay.
Any further questions about one more to talk about?
Yep.
You mentioned that's just one of the, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4 different properties. Could you show us where the others are? Like where it's on West Street? Do you have pictures of those?
I honestly was given this, and I don't know where any additional easements are. That looks like it has at least 2 properties. I don't know where the other 2 properties are. Yeah, there's 4 listed, yeah, so but it looks like there, at least I can see 2 different property owners that would be affected.
Just if it helps, when this was brought to the select board, these are all easements there south of Bay Road and West Bay Road, and are little slivers that really were designed to make sure that the utilities, the arms on the utility poles wouldn't hang over a property. So it's just adding a couple of feet to get that all properly eased. I'm sure we'll see the map when we get to town meeting.
I will make sure that a map is available because to be able to explain this better. The big one is from Hampshire College, which we are showing here. So, thank you. And so the last one, oh, I apologize. That's unfortunate. The last one is Boltwood Place. They are building a new building back there, and because of the new building, the Boltwood Place building that they're constructing, they had to move a sewer line. The sewer line is, on this, it's that black line that goes up that's labeled sewer line to be moved. If it had stayed where it was, it'd be in the basement of this building. So they had to move it out to, you can see that, the green line that runs parallel to it. So they had to move it out. So because of that, we are just requesting to abandon the existing easement that we had for that sewer line and then have a new easement for the relocated sewer line that's running next to that building, between that building and the parking garage.
Any further questions on the easements? Thank you.
Thanks.
Now we're going to have a 30-minute or less presentation from Jonathan O'Keefe concerning the pièce de la résistance.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan O'Keefe from the Planning Board and Chair of the Zoning Subcommittee. The Planning Board has 2 zoning articles on the warrant for this fall's town meeting. The first one, Article 16, is a proposal to change our official zoning map from its current form, which is 90 big dusty sheets of paper that are bound together somewhere down in the basement of Town Hall, to change that zoning map, which is over 50 years old at this point, to an electronic version on the town's geographic information system, online computer mapping system. The existing maps, as I mentioned, are over 50 years old. They were created from an aerial survey that took place in 1956, when, as you can probably imagine, the mapping technology wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is today. There are numerous problems with the existing paper maps. Obviously, they're difficult to work with, much more difficult than dealing with modern electronic mapping systems. And they're quite inaccurate in many cases also, both because the features were mapped inaccurately in the first place back in the 1950s when the mapping took place. They were unable to determine precisely, or as precisely as we can now, the location of features like small streams, and some of our zoning is based on the location of those features. And things have changed since then as well. Streams do move around, some roads have changed. Property boundaries change all the time, and many of the zoning boundaries follow property boundaries. And so dealing with all the inaccuracies in this map, keeping it updated on paper is a laborious process that takes a lot of time and effort, and it's really much more efficient to do these things on computers these days, which is how most people deal with digital mapping information and for 10 years or more. The town has a very robust GIS, geographic information system, that is used internally within Town Hall by town staff, and is also available as a resource to the public on the town's website. Most of you have probably seen that and used it already, but it's a great way to examine just all sorts of information about what's going on geographically in the town, and that includes the boundaries of our zoning districts. So what this article would do is basically change the legal official definition for all of our zoning districts from the lines as they're drawn on that paper map to reference instead a layer of information in the GIS system. Town staff has done a great deal of work over the last several years in preparing for this transition. They've gone over those 90 big maps by hand. They've scanned them all into the system. They've checked all the boundaries of the zoning districts to ensure that what we've got in the computer system is exactly the same as what we have on the paper maps today. And mostly that's a fairly simple process. Most of our zoning districts are pretty well defined. They follow things like property boundaries, they follow streets, setbacks from streets, and things that are fairly obvious on the ground. The one exception to that, and the reason that we probably didn't do this 2 or 3 years ago, is we have a flood-prone conservancy zoning district, FPC, that is defined differently than all of our other zoning districts. Rather than being delineated officially by lines on the map, the flood-prone conservancy district instead is based on elevation contours. So because it's intended to protect areas from flooding, obviously the height of the land is fairly important for the district boundaries. And so the map contains designations that say in a certain area, the boundary of the district follows that elevation line that's 240 feet above mean sea level, or it's set back 25 or 50 feet from such and such watercourse or stream. And that's the way that almost all the boundaries of that district are defined. And the issue obviously is that both they didn't know those things as well back in the 50s as we know them now, in particular elevations. Topographic maps were made in that era with elevation contours of 5-foot intervals or 10-foot intervals, meaning that they literally, it was hard to tell the difference between a point this high and a point this high, 5 feet apart. Our surveying tools today, we did an overflight 2 or 3 years ago that measures down to less than a foot of accuracy for elevation measurements. So we now have contour intervals throughout town at 1-foot increments, which is just much, much more accurate than what they had back then. And so the issue with the flood-prone conservancy district has been trying to translate all of those boundaries based on contours and elevations into what we have now, which is much more accurate information about that. And so the paper maps have a line that sort of indicates where the flood-prone conservancy district boundaries are supposed to be, but actually the governing feature of that is the elevations themselves. And so what we actually end up with based on the elevations that we know to be on the ground today sort of follows the general lines of the old paper maps, but are much more accurate and detailed. And so there's a lot more twists and turns to the lines that we see today than the ones that were on the old paper maps. And so as a result, there's some areas that are pushed into flood-prone conservancy and some areas that are pushed out of flood-prone conservancy, not in any substantial way, but there's small areas here and there, basically slivers of land around the edges, particularly where the land is flat and the difference of a foot or so in elevation makes a large difference on the ground in terms of the area covered. So, so that's the issue that town staff has spent the most time looking at, is dealing with the boundaries of that flood-prone conservancy district. We had a presentation at the planning board by Mike Olkin, the town's GIS administrator, and he gave us a lot of detail, and we'll have that information at town meeting also, about the exact details of the changes to the boundaries of the flood-prone conservancy district. All in all, he said there was about, the district itself covers about 1,900 acres, and of that 1,900 acres, there's around 65 acres around the margins that are either moving in or moving out of the district. And further, the majority of that land is actually in areas that are already protected by APRs or town conservation lands and other forms of protection. So there's actually only a dozen or a couple dozen acres that are having changes to this district boundary outside of protected areas. And that actually, that information is in the town's GIS system today already. It doesn't constitute the official zoning map, but you can go online to the town's GIS tool at the town website and see information both about our zoning in general. It's one of the layers on the map that's there now, along with the proposed changes from this article. Any questions on that?
What happens if the electricity goes out?
I'm sorry?
What happens if the electricity goes out?
That's actually a really good question. And what this proposes is that the official recognized legal definition of the districts would be a layer in the computerized system. But we would also print out hard copies that would be on file in the town clerk's office and available to some people just like to have a piece of paper in front of them and be able to refer to that. So, so that was an issue that was raised and thought about. Another concern that I didn't mention, but that we had some questions about, was security. This information is on a website that's open to the public. You can have all sorts of potential problems with, you know, people getting in or denying access to it. And we got a great deal of information from Mike in the town's IT department about the extensive protective mechanisms that they have and backup mechanisms. So the information is very well secured. It's not possible for anybody to go in and make changes to it without authorization, and it's backed up at very frequent intervals, and as I mentioned, printed out in hard copy and available in town hall.
Okay.
All right, let me put my maps up for Article 17.
Will the cameras be able to see that?
I can't answer that question. So Article 17 is a proposal for village center rezoning in both the North Amherst Village Center and the area around Atkins Market in South Amherst. And it includes a proposal to introduce form-based codes for the first time into our zoning bylaw, which is a significant step for us. Both these areas in North Amherst and South Amherst have been studied extensively for years, and both of them have fairly significant issues with their zoning currently. In North Amherst, there's a large parcel of land, the site of the former coal sawmill, that's most of the area between Montague Roads and Sunderland Road, north of the Mill River, that is currently zoned commercial. And commercial is our most intensive zoning district for commercial and retail and even industrial uses, and it permits a wide range of things that probably are not appropriate in a village center area. In South Amherst around Atkins, we've got obviously the ongoing road construction project there that's going to put in 2 new roundabouts and help with traffic flow significantly in that area, as well as putting in sort of a ring road behind Atkins Market, giving us the opportunity to be able to really strengthen the village center character down there and put in services that would be useful to the many nearby people in Hampshire College, Applewood, and the surrounding residential neighborhoods. So we've got major changes that we think we can make and improve in these village centers, both in North Amherst and South Amherst, and they're very well aligned with the directions that we have in the master plan. The master plan specifically calls for us to, and I'm reading from some of the points in the zoning proposal itself, maintain Amherst's existing community character, encourage vitality in the downtown and village centers, balance land preservation in outlying areas with more intense development in centers and other appropriate areas, provide housing that meets the needs of all residents, provide community services to meet the needs of all residents, and diversify and expand the economic base. So those are some of the design principles that went into this zoning proposal that we've been trying to meet. So the master plan also calls specifically for us to investigate and implement form-based code. That's a big theme in the master plan, and it's something that we're really excited about having the opportunity to introduce into our zoning bylaw. So what I'd like to do here is talk a little bit about form-based code itself and how it works, and then talk specifically about how this article is structured and how it would interact with our existing zoning bylaw. So what form-based code stands in contrast to our existing mechanism for zoning. What I would call use-based zoning is how we do things now. Our existing zoning bylaw has about 60 or 70 use categories that describe everything that you might possibly do on a piece of land. And it has a bunch of different zoning districts, and it basically works by telling you whether or not you're allowed to do each one of those uses in each one of those individual zoning districts. It doesn't really have a lot to say about the form or the character of what actually gets built or created. It just says what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. The decisions about what a project looks like and how it works and how it interacts with the environment are really up to the permitting boards that consider development projects, the planning board and the zoning board of appeals. There's not much in the bylaw that really speaks to regulating the form of what gets built. And that's traditional zoning. I mean, lots of people do that. We've been doing it for 70 or 80 years, or longer than that in some cases. But what people have seen over the last 15 or 20 years, people have been looking at smart growth, is that lack of control over the built environment really it's not optimal for creating real healthy environments, particularly in town centers and in village centers like we're talking about here. And so there's a new wave of zoning regulations that people have been adopting in New England and around the country over the last 15 or 20 years that collectively we call form-based codes. And what that really means is that your zoning now would have a mechanism for specifying not just what you're allowed to do and where you're allowed to do it, but what you want the outcome to look like, what shapes the buildings take, how they relate to each other, how they relate to the street, how parking is managed, whether it's in front of the building, behind the building, all kinds of things designed to create an environment that people are comfortable with in a village center or a town center environment where you can walk and bicycle to buildings easily. You're not lost in a sea of parking or traffic, as traditionally happens when people build things that are pushed back from the road with a big sea of parking in front of them. So it's much more specific than existing zoning mechanisms in terms of requiring basically a certain form, certain characteristics of what gets built. And so that's the major contrast to how we've always done zoning. And what it lets you do is specify up front what you'd like your village center to look like. and to say that whatever happens there, it's going to look like this. This is the type of environment that we want to create and encourage, and it gives us predictability in terms of knowing that what eventually gets built, whatever the uses are, it will have a certain form that we feel is appropriate in our community. So in terms of the interaction with existing zoning, all of our existing zoning remains on the books and doesn't go away. This would be another layer on top of our existing use-based zoning. So there's still regulation about what's allowed where. You still have the big use table that defines those 60 or 70 use categories that I mentioned. And they would be regulated in both the North Amherst Village Center and the Atkins Corner, the two new districts that are proposed to be created. Those uses are regulated in those areas just as they are now in all other areas. So what we've done is we've gone through and talked about those areas and what uses would be appropriate and would not be appropriate in village centers like North Amherst and Atkins Corners. And we've created a set of use regulations that would be, we think would be appropriate in those areas. On top of those use regulations would be the form-based regulations that I just described that define things like the building size and mass, connection to the other buildings in the area, and so on. So in terms of the structure of the article, what you've received in your warrant is actually just an outline of the zoning proposal. The next mailing will contain a big thick packet that looks like this that has the full details of the zoning proposal. All of that information is already available online on the town website, and I encourage people to look at it. But what you have in your warrant is an outline basically consisting of a number of parts that propose changes to several sections, really large parts of the existing zoning bylaw. So the first part is Part A, and that would add a whole new chapter. That's the real heart of the regulations. Chapter 16 in the zoning bylaw would be the form-based code regulating mechanism, and that has details on all the aspects that the code would have authority over, different types of streets, different types of buildings, what the design characteristics for those streets and buildings would be, basically everything that speaks to the specific issues of form. That would be a new chapter in the bylaw, Article 16. The second part of the article, the warrant article, Part B, would create two new zoning districts, the North Amherst Village Center, which we're abbreviating NAVC, and the Atkins Corner AC zoning districts. Those are the two primary zoning districts that are shown on the maps behind me. This is North Amherst, and the area in this orangish color is proposed to be zoned as NAVC. That's the new district. And over here, this is Atkins Corners, and again, that same pink color is proposed to be the new Atkins Corner zoning districts. Those are the two new core zoning districts for those two areas. In addition to that, we would create two new overlay districts. These would apply around the edges, some of the edges of the districts I showed. And on the maps, these are delineated by dotted lines around up along Montague Road here, along Pine Street, along Meadow Street, and south along North Pleasant Street, and in a section in South Amherst along the north side of Bay Road on the edge of the Hampshire College property. Those would be overlay districts where the form regulations would apply, but there would be no changes to use. The underlying the zoning in the underlying areas would remain in effect, and all those use regulations would remain in effect also. The form regulations would be the only aspect that would apply. In addition, we're proposing doing some changes to the underlying zoning districts. In particular, in North Amherst, in this section along Montague Road, this would change from the current zoning, which is RN, to RVC, which is a more intense residential use that we feel is appropriate for an area that's in immediate proximity to Village Center. There's also some changes in South Amherst. There's a large area here south of, this is Applewood right here. This is Atkins Market over here. This area that's shown in green would change from the current zoning, which I think is RO, to RVC, the same zoning change proposed.
Jonathan,
Yes.
for the television audience, could you?
Oh, sure. Thanks. Sorry about that. So I was describing this green area south of Applewood, which is currently mostly zoned RO, outlying residence. It would change to RVC, again, more in character with an area in immediate proximity to the village center area around the two new roundabouts. So those would be the new zoning districts, 2 new core zoning districts and 2 overlay zoning districts. The next sections of the article would make changes to existing regulations that are in our zoning bylaw. There's lots of sections of the zoning bylaw that refer to various zoning districts, in particular the center, village center districts and the downtown residential and business districts, and those were adding references to these 2 new zoning districts in various parts of the bylaw, so that the regulations for these districts would be similar to our existing town centers and village centers. Part E of the article is a change to the dimensional regulations. There's a table in the zoning bylaw that for each one of our zoning districts defines various dimensional regulations. So these are new zoning districts that we're creating, so they would also need their own dimensional regulations, and that's what Part E does. We're also adding a bunch of new definitions in Part H to Article 12. Article 12 is sort of the glossary of the zoning bylaw that has definitions for a lot of terms that we use. The form-based zoning introduces a bunch of new concepts and a bunch of new words that we don't have in our bylaw currently, and a lot of those need clarification and definition. So we're adding definition for a lot of those. And we're also cleaning up some of the existing definitions, in particular, providing more detail on the distinction between apartments and townhouses. Right now, the zoning bylaw doesn't have a definition at all for what constitutes apartments, so we're adding one. And it has a definition for townhouses that's inadequate and doesn't serve to differentiate them well, so we're clarifying that definition. And finally, Part I, the last section, is the actual change to the zoning map. So having created all the new districts and all the regulations that pertain to those districts in the earlier sections of the article, the last section would actually change the zoning map to make it look as represented on the maps here.
Jonathan,
Yes.
the article has these references to attachments that are available in the town clerk's office and the planning board office. Attachment A, B, C, D, E, F.
So
Are those included in that big packet?
Yes, they are the big packet. So this packet that I'm holding in my hand is essentially the set of all of those attachments.
Okay. So to understand the full meaning of the article, you would have to have access to that as well as to the article itself.
That's correct, yes. The details are all contained in here. And as I mentioned, that will go out in the next mailing to town meeting members.
Any further questions? Ms. Gray?
Wait, Carol?
I have too many questions to ask all in this one sitting, and I think probably a lot of people have questions. But I mean, one question I have is, there's a half-inch thick packet of materials that we don't have yet, and we're going to be handed them a week or so before town meeting. They're very complicated, and we won't have this forum to even ask questions. This seems very premature to even bring up this overhaul without giving the public enough time to digest it. I don't know what questions to ask because I don't even have the packet yet. But then I have other specific questions related to North Amherst, which is how does the proposed zoning compare to the visioning process that was done in the community? I don't live in North Amherst, but I know there was quite active participation from that community. And what feedback have you gotten from the people in North Amherst about these proposed changes? And then lastly, is there some development project or some business proposal coming down the pike that will be benefited by these changes in North Amherst? And if so, what is it?
So several different questions there. In terms of the public process that we conducted, we've been conducting throughout the course of the year, really, going back to the spring through the summer and into the fall, a very extensive public process where we held a design charrette in both North Amherst and in South Amherst. We've had a series of public meetings since then, and we've received a very wide range of feedback and very extensive feedback. People have many different views on what should be done in both of these areas, and no project is going to satisfy everybody's needs. So you asked specifically about what people think there. There are people on the ground there that are not happy with the proposal, and they would like to see it changed. So we've definitely gotten that feedback. We've gotten all sorts of feedback, and it's my opinion that we've been careful and responsible in trying to craft a proposal that meets everything that we've heard and doesn't favor one group over another. So, you know, people can draw their own opinions about that. But
and what's the business interest or development or something that is in the future that would be directly related to these zoning changes? What's going to happen? Do you know the project?
So obviously, the major development issue in North Amherst is the former Coles sawmill, which was operational until a couple of years ago, is no longer operational, and is likely to be redeveloped regardless of what happens. So as I mentioned, that area is zoned commercial now, and commercial is, as I said, our most intense commercial zoning district. It allows all sorts of it allows just about any commercial or industrial endeavor, and we feel that that's not the most appropriate set of uses that could go in immediate proximity to a village center. So the idea that could be redeveloped in a way that does not fit with what people on the ground there would like to see, and that the town would have little or no control over, we felt it would be much preferable to have a set of regulations that would carefully control the form and the uses of whatever goes in there. So it would give the town a great deal of control by specifying exactly what we want to, whatever goes in there, what we want it to look like and how we want it to interact with the existing village center. So you asked about specific projects. I don't have details about any specific project because that's not what zoning deals with. Zoning doesn't deal with projects. It deals with possibilities. It deals with what uses are or are not appropriate in any given area. So that's the approach that we've been taking and that we generally take with all zoning discussions, is to look at generally what is appropriate where. That's kind of the general idea of zoning.
In the back there? Yes.
Yes, hi. My understanding from what I've heard is that Part D is where one would find the use regulations that would apply to these new districts. Is that a correct impression?
I'm sorry, did you say Part B or Part D?
D as in dog.
The use regulation, I don't have the warrant in front of me, so I think Part D actually has to do with accessory uses. Let me double check that. The use regulations, I think, would be in C2. Yes.
Yeah.
Amend section 3. C2 says amend section 3.2 use classification and standards. That's the big table of uses that's in the zoning bylaw.
Right. Okay, thanks. I think it'll be helpful, I think, for people to be able to find what the use regulations will apply.
Sure.
There was another question. Adrian?
I understand that there have been revisions since the late September first draft of Article 17, and the ones that we received in the warrant is the latest draft that will come before us. Is that accurate, Jonathan? Because I know you've had discussions regarding changes in the September draft of 17 and the one we're receiving.
Yeah, that's correct. We've been working with a constant stream of drafts and changes and revisions because it is a big proposal that has lots of detail in it. And so the most recent round of revisions that we made was in late September. I'm not sure about the exact date of the draft that you're referring to, but we haven't made major changes since that draft. We've sort of, we changed some of the use classifications, some of the permit requirements for a couple of use cases, but not very many. So there are changes, but they're not extensive.
And I guess that my question really was, what should we be targeting without having to go line by line with that dense document to look for those changes? And then I do have another statement I'd like to make. Oh.
The version that will be in the mailing is the version that will be moved, word for word.
Okay. And just quickly, I know during the Sherretts that the Cecil group made, at least in the group that I was with, a very concerted effort to try to help us understand form-based code. That's still quite a concept to draw a brain around, a non-planning person's brain around, and with the absence of a model that adds a second layer. But I do also understand that we're going to have an evening that the Cecil group will be presenting form-based code. I'd love to hear about that.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. 2 weeks from last night, on Wednesday, November 2nd, at the planning board meeting on that evening, we have a session scheduled with Steve Cecil from the Cecil group, who's the consultant that we've been working with in developing this proposal. Steve's going to come into our planning board meeting and give a general introductory session to form-based code to specifically address the types of concerns that you mentioned. It will be televised, it will be rebroadcast, and it will be available online for on-demand viewing.
Alice?
I've gotten a little confused. Does this form-based zoning refer to the entire town or just to the North Amherst and the South Amherst and the...
That's a good question, and the answer is that it would apply only to the new districts that are being created.
Just those two?
So the language that's in the proposal says specifically that it says where it applies, and those are the new districts, what's shown on the map here.
Just those two. Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the procedure at town meeting regarding this article, and whether it will make any sense to vote on different parts of the article, or break it up in some way.
So that's another good question, and so I can provide some guidance on that, but ultimately that decision is going to come from the man sitting to my right. So the way that the article is structured here is broken up into different sections referring to different parts of the zoning bylaw. It's unlikely that it will be moved in sections like that because the sections all interrelate, and it would be quite meaningless to have the possibility of passing one of the sections but not another because they depend on one another. So this is just an organizational structure that doesn't necessarily pertain to the actual motion that will be made. It's possible and likely that a motion will be made in terms of the article as a whole. The most frequent question people have had is whether we will or whether someone could divide the North Amherst portion from the South Amherst portion, and I'll defer to Harrison on that. That they are interwoven throughout the text of the article, so that would be a fairly substantial change.
The rules of town meetings say that an article, a motion can be divided on the motion of a single member if the sense permits. I'm inclined to believe that all of the particular regulatory aspects of this do hang together as one big unit, and so that it would be hard to divide one part out from another. Whether Atkins Corner could be, say, ruled out and it could apply only to North Amherst or vice versa, that's another question, and I would have to consider that. But it seems to me that if it works for North Amherst, it would work for North Amherst whether Atkins was included or not, and vice versa.
I think that's a true statement. The main challenge would be logistical, given that the text of the article contains references throughout to both areas, right, so it would require a lot of surgery to separate.
Right, it would not be a division so much as an amendment which struck all references to one or the other. Mr. Tucker?
Staff is well aware of the desire on a number of folks to be able to address different aspects of this, and so we will be working with the town moderator to explore what is possible in terms of whether we're dividing by village center or anyone at any time can move, for instance, to change a regulatory a permit requirement for a specific use or something in some portion of the bylaw. But we're going to try to make an effort to explore what is possible, and, rather than simply saying it's all up or it's all down. We don't want to do that.
Mr. Fox?
Can you give us names of towns in Massachusetts and towns elsewhere that have adopted this form-based zoning, so we have a sense of how the zoning is played out over some years?
Yes, we're working on putting together a list of communities in Massachusetts, other towns in New England, as well as communities throughout the country. There's quite a lot of them to draw from, so we intend to have not just names, but examples and photographs. And
these are communities that have adopted
form-based codes, correct.
And so, but you couldn't name some of them now, so we can. Some of us can't come to the November 2nd meeting, and so we won't hear that presentation. It would be nice to know in advance so we can think about some of those towns. And
sure. I see Mr. Tucker's hand going up in the back. I think he has at least some of the names in Massachusetts.
Mr. Tucker?
The Cecil Group itself has worked with a number of communities, and at least a couple of them I'm aware of were adopted. The town of Wellesley is one. One that I'm not sure the Cecil Group worked on, the city of Lowell, has had form-based zoning for some time. There are a number of other towns on the Cape that have explored form-based zoning as well. We are, as was said, developing a list not only of communities in Massachusetts, but also in the New England region. Saratoga Springs, New York, has had for some years and has had development under form-based code. One of the questions that keeps being asked, well, can you find a community like Amherst that has done this? There is no community like Amherst in New England. We have the largest state university campus in New England, in a town that would otherwise be only a few tens of thousands. So we can make analogies. We cannot make exact comparisons, and we will have more extensive information available on November 2nd, and if we can get it earlier, we'll put it on the website. Incidentally, for those of you who, again, who are interested, all of this is on the website now, and it is organized. It's on the zoning, it's on the town meeting portion of the website under other related information, and it is organized by sections, so you can pick out which section you're interested in, and it will open that section only, and you don't have to wade through however many pages are in the entire document.
Okay, we've used up more than our time allotted to this subject, and we have other things to do this evening, so there will be many other opportunities to pose questions, and such things as that November 2nd meeting will be on the web on demand. Yes. So thank you very much, Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you.
We're going to turn now to Committee on Homelessness, Ms. Simula Gooden.
Good evening. My name is Rika Simula Gooden. I was the vice chair of the former Committee on Homelessness. First of all, I would like to thank the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee and the Amherst League of Women Voters for hosting this event. I am honored to be part of the warrant review presenters. Article 18 is an advisory article. It asks Town Meeting to advise the Select Board to establish a committee. The committee is proposed to be called Committee on Homelessness. The charge of the committee includes the following 6 items. Number 1, to participate in local and regional discussions to prevent and end homelessness. Number 2, to provide recommendations to the Select Board and Town Manager on the best known practices to prevent and end homelessness. Number 3, to assist the town and town manager in implementing these practices. Number 4, to assist the town in securing a permanent site for the town's homeless shelter. Number 5, to assist the towns to secure permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless. Number 6, to assist the town to secure safe and decent housing to meet the needs of the very low income and the extremely low income households in Amherst. Article 18 points out that the former Committee on Homelessness was able to focus its attention to address the sheltering and housing needs of the homeless and the extremely low-income households in Amherst in a very concerted way that, number 1, after 20 years of talking about establishing a homeless shelter to meet the needs of the homeless, the town, with the assistance of the former Committee on Homelessness, was able to establish a shelter 2 years ago. A third shelter season will begin on time this year on November 1st, 2011. And secondly, hundreds of thousands of community development block grant dollars were successfully advocated for by the former committee to fund projects that benefited the homeless. To name a few, the funding for the feasibility study of 2008, the funding for building single-room occupancy units of 2009, the emergency assistance funds for rent and fuel of 2011, and the shelter funding of 2010 and 2011. Representatives from towns and cities in the Pioneer Valley set the goal in 2008 to end homelessness by 2018. Article 18 advises the town to build 60 to 20 units of supportive housing for Amherst residents who have been identified to be chronically homeless. Article 18 also advises the town to start building housing for households in the 30% area median income bracket whose housing needs are often neglected and who can only afford rent at the $350 range. To achieve all of these goals, Article 18 advises the Select Board to establish a committee with this very specific and focused set of charges mentioned above. Thank you. Does anyone have questions? Kevin? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You said it was advisory, so does that mean that the select board, if this were to pass, is not obliged to do anything from it?
That's correct. It's advice to the select board.
Anybody else? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Ms. O'Keefe is going to talk about Articles 7 and 11.
Thank you. Stephanie O'Keefe, Chair of the Select Board. First article is Article 7, and this is about affordable housing restrictions. This is for some properties, some parcels on Olympia Drive, and first of all, I just want to establish that this has nothing to do with Olympia Oaks. This is 2 duplexes, units 5 through 11, that are owned by the Amherst Housing Authority that are on the corner of Olympia Drive and East Pleasant Street. These are owned, as I mentioned, by Amherst Housing Authority. In 2010 Community Development Block Grant Program, the town allocated money to help to improve and modernize these units as part of a larger improvement of Amherst Housing Authority units. And because federal money through the CDBG program was put towards this improvement, the town needs to accept affordable housing restrictions on these properties. These are 15-year restrictions to keep these units affordable, and town meeting approval is needed in order for the select board to accept the restrictions on those properties. Any questions about that one?
What does this do affecting housing units that are available to people who have limited incomes?
It keeps them there. It helps to ensure that they remain part of our inventory. Am I calling on, Mr. Moderator, am I calling on folks, or are you?
Ms. Beanie?
Can you tell us if 15 years is the maximum that a town can get? Can we get better than that?
That's a good question I don't know the answer to. I was told that these are 15-year restrictions, and that is standard for these. It does say in the article that it's on terms acceptable to the select board or whatever. I don't know if we have any ability to tweak those at all.
Peter?
I thought that a couple of years ago, or maybe it's even a part of the big package housing thing that Community Preservation Act Committee recommended and town meeting voted. I thought these units were part of that and that we already had a permanent restriction on here.
So this was part of a collection of money that was put together to improve 22 units of housing authority. Correct. So this was community development block grant money, CPA money, and money from DHCD. It all totaled up to $1.2 million. I believe that they have different restriction requirements, that they all need them. So it's kind of a technicality that we need to meet the restriction requirements of each one of them. Other questions?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
We're going to talk about Article 11.
Article 11. Article 11 is the sewer extension project. The town has recently updated the sewer extension master plan, and this looks at where it is necessary or desirable to extend the town's sewer lines. This is a very large document. The plan itself looks like this, has many appendices, and all of this is available on the town website. I have no idea actually what you're going to end up with in your packets, but the sewer plan itself is not town meeting's problem. The sewer plan is the select board's problem because in addition to being the select board, we are also the sewer commissioners. And I tell you that the jokes just write themselves there. So the last, this full plan, if you're really interested, is available on the Public Works section of the town website, and it's on the wastewater page. So you'll have all of that information and more there. Just to give you in a nutshell what this is talking about, the last sewer plan was done in 1991. So it's 20 years old. It was updated in 2005, but that plan was never accepted. It just kind of went away. We now have a new update, and the Select Board, as sewer commissioners, as I mentioned, has the option to accept this plan or not. And if we accept it, we have the option to implement it or not. And if we implement it, there's the question of how you pay for its implementation. All of those decisions are going to be made Monday night, this coming Monday, October 24th, at the Select Board meeting. What this article does is it deals with how to pay for those decisions if we make the decision to go ahead. So as I said, the Select Board could, on Monday night, opt to not accept this plan, and so if it's not accepted, then there's no implementation. If there's no implementation, then this article goes away. We would simply move to dismiss it. Or we could move to accept the plan and then move to implement it. And the plan recommends implementation in two areas. I'll get into the specifics of that in a moment. But if we were to implement it on the recommendation to these two areas, then the question is, how much does that cost and how do you pay for it? How does the town pay for it? The article language, as you can see, is extremely vague. It has no mention of money at this point. That's because we don't know yet. That decision hasn't been made. So the article language is allowing for every possible outcome at this point, and the motion itself will be much more specific. So there are two key areas of town where the sewer need is assessed by the plan as moderate, based on a variety of criteria, including septic failure rates, soil limitations, and environmental concerns. And those areas are on Harkness Road in East Amherst and in the Wildflower Drive area in Amherst Woods. At town meeting, there will be maps about this. All the other areas that are included in the report were listed as minor need or no significant need at all. So I'll tell you that the town is already 93% sewered, so we're talking about small areas overall. So the plan itself calls for implementation for those two areas that were identified as moderate need, Harkness and Wildflower areas. If we were to do both of those areas as recommended, the total cost estimates are about $4.2 million. That would be $600,000 for the Harkness area and $3.6 million for the Wildflower area. There are a couple of methods, a couple of options for paying for this, and those are the decisions the Select Board will make on Monday as recommendations to town meeting. Those options are via the property tax, which would have 100% of property owners paying for that, spreading the cost across all sewer customers, or assessing the costs to those properties that would be getting the new sewer lines, or any combination thereof. If the select board accepts the plan, we'll make the determination about that on Monday, as I mentioned. We will decide which of those to pursue through implementing it. And so just to give you a sense of kind of the extremes that we're talking about here, if we were to go for the full betterment, as it's called, assessing the fee wholly to the folks who would be getting the new sewer lines, for the Wildflower project, that would be about $17,500 per home. That would be the full cost of the extension. And they would have the option to pay that over 20 years. For the Harkness Road portion, it would be about $23,900 per home, again with the option to pay that over 20 years. The other extreme would be if we were to assess it through the sewer fund, through the increase in sewer rates. That would turn out to about $640 per average family of 4 over 20 years, or $32 per year increase in the sewer bill. So just to give you a sense of halfway, if we were to do, say, half betterment, that would be assessing 50% of the cost just to the folks who are getting the sewer, and 50% to the sewer fund. That would be, just doing the math is obvious, $8,750 for the Wildflower area, about $12,000 for Harkness area, and about $16 per year for the average sewer customer. So that's all I'm going to talk about this giant plan, because I think the nutshell is kind of all you need to know, and that's the at this point. And just how the decisions the select board is going to make fit in with the warrant article. If you want more information, there's plenty of information out there. The Public Works section of the town website, as I mentioned, the wastewater page, has a ton of information. It has this this whole plan, as well as the presentations that have been made recently about this. Also, the September 26th Select Board meeting, which you can watch online and is still in rotation on Amherst Media, had a 1-hour overview presentation of this plan by Guilford Mooring and Sandy Pooler, the town finance director, with a question and answer period, all about the things in much greater detail than I've talked about. There was a special meeting on October 11th in this room that was an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that was a presentation by the consultant that did the plan, and Mr. Mooring and Mr. Pooler, and had a question and answer period. And of course, Monday, October 24th, you can watch the next iteration of this process at the select board meeting on Monday night. So I'll stop there and answer questions.
Any questions? Ms. Gordon.
Nancy?
What proportion of the town is unserved by, if you complete this plan, is unserved then?
That's a good question. I can't answer that. So that that's some subset of the 7% that's unserved.
Thinking about it, because it's a question of, is this the end, or are there going to be more, and how many more, and so on?
Okay, well, so I don't know the percentage of the land, the percentage of customers that equals in town, but yes, there are still about half a dozen sub-areas that they identify as different levels of need. But as I said, those needs currently are considered minor or no significant need whatsoever. So, and part of that takes into account not just the all the soil issues and everything, but also the cost of doing it. So at this point, the need and cost situation for those, just they have a whole formula that they use, which is well explained in the document. And so those other areas just don't rise to the top. Somewhere down the road, of course, need changes over time. So it certainly is possible that, some number of years from now, the need for those different areas will have changed, and we'll be looking at this again. That's why you have to update the plan periodically to see what the situation is and what the town needs to do to respond.
Ms. Streeter?
I have 2 questions for Ms. O'Keefe and one for Mr. Gregg. The first question is, could you provide town meeting members with a range of the other costs that a homeowner might have to pay in order to tie into the sewer? Because I understand that they would have to have a trench dug and a pipe brought out to the street. There's a $2,000 connection fee currently, and they would have to pay to have their old septic system filled in. And many homes, or some homes that are a little below street grade, will have to also buy a pump that would cost about $5,000. So I'm wondering, in the neighborhoods that you're talking about, this might affect, approximately what other costs that might be in addition, that would absolutely happen if you tied into the sewer line, but then if you put a betterment fee on top of that, if you could show us the full range of costs a homeowner might experience, that would be helpful.
I'm not sure if we're going to be offering that, but you're absolutely right that there are other costs. What this is talking about is the cost to the town. What the cost is of extending and installing the sewer lines themselves. That then creates a bunch of sometimes expensive options to the homeowners, but this is about covering the cost of the sewer extension.
Thank you. And also, at one of the previous meetings, I asked the question about what is the cost of this current update and what was the cost of the original plan. And Mr. Mooring told me the current update costs $41,500. He wasn't able to give me, this was about a week ago, the cost of the original plan, and I'm wondering if that was found out yet.
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay, and then my question for Mr. Gregg was, can this article be divided? I know it's in like a part 1, 2, and 3, such that the two sections that refer to betterments, can that be divided to take that out?
I think the motion, it'll be the motion that we're working with. And when you bring the motion, I presume you will have considered these various alternatives, and we'll be moving only certain alternatives.
So the article language, as I mentioned, deals with, it keeps open every possibility at this point. If, depending what decisions the select board makes and what recommendation is going to be to town meeting, some of these might fall away, or the different parts of them would become very specific. So as Mr. Gregg said, it will be all dealt with in the motion.
Thank you. The motion will be subject to amendment, as any motion is.
So I think part of what you're asking is if you were to separate this such that the betterments were not part of it, for example, if there was a betterment recommendation and then the betterment failed, because you separated them, town meeting has the appropriating authority. Town meeting has to pay for this. It can only go forward at the full amount that town meeting decides. So I don't know what would happen if you were able to do that, but thank you.
Ms. Gray?
I was just wondering, so the costs, I don't live in that area, but it sounds like for individual homeowners could be really high. I think of the "if it isn't broken, don't fix it" motto, and I'm wondering, was there some outcry for a great need to revamp this, or not? And if there is an urgent need for some areas, could it be a more targeted fix instead of, I've heard that this could even apply to people who, for example, just put in a new septic system and wouldn't even want to be hooked up to sewer, and yet it might cost them $17,000. Anyway, could you talk about what the history
Sure. So there has been a big outcry for this. There are a lot of folks who want to be on the sewers who are not there currently. So it was the interest from them that got the plan going again. There would not be any there would not be any requirement to connect if the sewers were put in. So everyone would have you would have the option whether or not you wanted to tie into the sewers. However, if we went the betterment route, the betterment would be assessed on your property, and you would have to deal with that because it was an improvement to the utilities to your home. You would have the option of doing the rest of the rest of the work it takes to actually tie in. And some people would, if you just put in a new septic system, then you would decide clearly that wasn't the right time for you to do that. But the septic system has only a certain lifespan, so by the time you got to the end of its lifespan, you've now paid for the fact that sewer is in your neighborhood, is on your street. Now you just have the connection fees to be part of it. But the betterment part does, you would have to pay that anyway.
Anyone else? Mr. Fox? Mr. Fox is recognized. Sorry,
I'll be very quick. Just two questions, Stephanie. And one is, how did Camp Dresser and McKee determine moderate need? What were their criteria? And then secondly, anything in that 2005 update that might inform us about this particular warrant article?
I don't understand your second question.
You said that there was a 2005 update on the sewers.
So this
sewer plan, there was my understanding, 2005 update, but it was never used or utilized.
Correct.
So my question is, and it's the second one, but what was moderate need, and was there something in the interim since 2005 that propelled the request for this study?
Okay. So I think I understand, and we'll try and answer those. So the moderate need is determined by a very complicated formula that is very well explained in here, and it talks about all kinds of different environmental issues, about issues of the soil ability to leach wastewater, how close it is to the aquifer. That's one part of the ratio of the equation. Other parts of it have to do with the topography in the area and what would need to be done physically to attach to the sewers, whether it would need all the various pumps and I don't really speak the language of sewer engineering, so you'll have to excuse me. But it is all well explained in here, as well as the various cost benefit issues of the costs overall, and this is separate. This isn't a comma. We'll just put a period at the end of that sentence, and I'm going to start again and say that another part of it is the question of how much development possibility it would open up in the different areas. That was considered a factor that was negative, and so that would have something score much lower. So it's really a complicated formula that deals with a bunch of different things to come to a total. So the total number is, they have the different ranges. It's essentially the score that something received, and the two areas that are in the moderate category, by dealing with all of those different elements I talked about, put them into the area of moderate need. As to the 2005 study, the information isn't different. So in 2005, they were using similar everything, similar equations. They came to similar conclusions. I don't know how the different need situations were addressed, what the recommendation was at that point. But this builds on this. That wasn't like a separate study that you would learn something different from. This took all that information and said, okay, now we have 6 more years of time under our belt. Let's go in and see what information we can update.
Okay, we need to come to a closer. Do you still have a question, Mr.?
How would we pay for sewer extensions before? Have we ever charged homeowners?
An excellent question. Town-wide, for a town-determined sewer extension, it has always been through the sewer fund. The most recent town expansions were in 2002 in the Middle Street area, which was about 130 houses, and in 2004 in Chapel Road and Mechanic Street, which was about 115 houses. There have been other sewer extensions. More recently than that was in Amherst Hills, which is a private development. The developer there opted to put in the sewer themselves, so all of those people paid specifically for their own sewers as part of the price of buying their house. But there's never been, there's no evidence of the town ever having assessed a betterment for folks to whom the sewer was extended.
Okay, thank you, Ms. O'Keefe.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all the presenters for the time that they've given and effort they've given to this, and I'm sure they have all taken note of the questions they didn't have the answers to, and they'll have them for town meeting. And now I'll turn things back over to Ms. Roberts.
And I want to be sure that all of you have opened up your packets. You town meeting members have received your first packets. The second packet is going to be thick. So it really helps to try to sit down and prepare for town meeting. There are other ways that the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee is going to try to help you get ready for town meeting. One is the bus tour on Sunday, October 30th from 2 to 4. We're meeting in the middle school parking lot and want you to be there by 1:45 because the bus really leaves at 2. And that's really an interesting way to go and look at some of the sites connected with these articles that we've talked about. Then there are precinct meetings the week before town meeting. And the times and places for those is on the website. Oh, it's good. Excellent. And please, if you haven't picked up an evaluation form for this evening, do pick up one and fill it out, because we try to get better and better at these things that we're trying to do for you. Thank you, Amherst Media. Couldn't live without them if we're interested in local government.